Hello, my name is Rich Howard, owner of Architectural Builder Supply. This video is to bring you a closer look at the Best Access CD517. It is a capping block press is what it is. It's a capping press. And if you have worked with Best products at all, you certainly are familiar with the process of capping the chambers. Best is an individually capped product, or at least historically has always been an individually capped product, and other manufacturers countless manufacturers make clones and copies of the original Best design. Most notably was, of course, Falcon, I believe, in the 1960s. They avoided that patent problem. They primarily changed, and this is where the tool comes in, the individual capping to a slide cover that would cover all of the chambers. I am an absolute fan when it comes to not individually capping. Just time is why. And the investment in tools is not insignificant when it comes to individually capping if you want to do them quickly. So when you have a small format core that's individually capped, and Falcon makes them individually capped as well. I don't know that Best makes a slide cover version. They may. But you need to load the core with all of your pins or segments, they call it, in an A2 system. They may call the pins segments as well in A3 and A4. I think the letters that they use for master and then bottom pins for driver, or top pins and master pins, they use different letter combinations for A2, A3, and A4. But I think they're all called segments. When you need to load all of your segments, and then you need to put your springs, and then you need to individually cap each 6 or 7, maybe even 5 chambers. That's time consuming. The advantage of the capping press, and while it's a lot of money, and it's a lot of money, and the people who are buying it have a need to key and therefore cap tremendous quantities of cylinders, where it would be absolutely no difficult task to justify the cost of a dedicated tool for capping these cores. It might be a military installation. It might be a hospital. It might be a large private commercial business campus where there's, thousands upon thousands or tens of thousands of cylinders at play. And you don't want someone spending time individually capping the chambers when they could not only cap them all at once, but cap them to the proper depth, because in the Best system, and in most systems, the pin stack and the spring that you're using is all engineered and designed to go together. In the Best system, where you place that cap, the depth at which you place the cap in the top of the cylinder, in the top of the core, is at a specific depth. That capping tool will make sure that you're not only capping them all at once, but you're setting them to the proper depth. The integrity of the system is based on, the pin stack total number 23 for A2 systems, and then A3 and A4 have their own number. But having your segments equal that, the right spring, and then capped to the proper depth, all go together. And I've tried the incorrect spring or a different spring. It just doesn't work, and you don't want to use any components not engineered originally, and you don't want to use, when you're individually capping, you have the ability to under or overset the depth of that cap. You don't want that to be part of the reasoning why your cylinder would fail. So the investment in a dedicated tool, which is a really simple tool, is easily justified when you have volume. And I'll tell you, even if you do a small volume, a job of 30 cylinders that you have to individually cap is a large job when you're individually capping those. So be mindful that this tool, while it's expensive, if you're going to individually cap, then you need to, unless this is a one-time job only and you're not doing very many, then this tool would be the way for you to consider going. And we're going to show you that tool in a moment. Before we do that, there is going to be a couple of pieces that I will show you. This is what's called a decapping tool, and I will show you how this works. There are 3 components involved in the decapping tool: the actual pins, the block itself and then the set screws that hold the pins in. There's obviously not obviously, there was an Allen wrench here used for servicing the tool. You're going to get with you the unpacking instructions, and you do want to be mindful to unpackage it correctly. Just be careful. Remove the foam. Don't grab the tool by anything that's fragile. Don't grab it by the pins themselves. And then you're going to get operating instructions, and we're going to go over all of the steps in this one by one. You're also going to get a segment cup. The segment cup is nothing other than a plastic cup that you will place underneath when you are decapping to catch all of the springs and the ejected segments. So let's continue on this video with a review of the capping and decapping press itself. Okay, so I don't know who manufactures the press itself, and generally something like this would be called an arbor press, A-R-B-O-R, arbor press, and it's probably a half a ton rating. I've owned a Dake press in the past. Don't remember how many tons it was. It was not tremendous, maybe 10 or 12, something in that range. But this will certainly give you enough force to be able to properly cap the material. This weighs in its shipping box 28.75 pounds. And obviously here's the business end of everything we're dealing with. And what you're dealing with here is a typical capping block from Best, which you can buy that separately. They've clearly machined that, or they've taken a press from who knows what importer, supplier, the press itself. Who knows where that comes from. And then someone modifies it to be appropriate for capping and decapping. And obviously, giving you the capping block at the bottom, the black block right here, for you to insert your core, either right side up or right side down, holding it in place. They're going to give you a feeding plate here where you can dump all your caps into and pull them out, feed them out, making them flush into the top of the capping block. Obviously, your capping pins are here. That's a modification. Okay. The other modification is going to be on the arbor itself, or on the rack itself. They're going to give you the ability to stop the tool right where it needs to stop and not allowing you to go any further, because that screw that's there is stopping it. It's going to have this inserted roll pin and will serve to let you know when your tool is up at the top of the capping block. So those modifications, the capping block itself, the plate, the cap plate, the ability to stop the unit at a particular depth, and then to have your handle come back. So it's just one operation. Down, all the way back up. Down, and all the way back up. You can bolt this down to your desktop, your workbench. Got a couple holes down there in the base. Okay. And while you can certainly buy an arbor press a lot less expensively than this, you would have to do some machining to be able to modify it to make your own. And I just really don't know about, could you make your own capping press? Absolutely you could. Would you need to really fully copy this? Absolutely you would. So, again, the time-saving nature of the tool, and that's what it is. There are lots of images down below showing what this exact item looks like. There's photographs that you'll be able to review. So I think at this point, let's take a look at, or let's switch to the screen view where we can take a look at the extended description of this item along with all of the supporting documentation. And let's see if we can talk a little bit more about it. Before we do that, what's important to know about capping presses or decapping presses as well would be to understand that they are not all compatible. Now, if you're doing Best or a clone of Best, Arrow, Falcon, countless Asian manufacturers, other people who make these, this capping press will work. There are others where it will not work. And what I mean by that is, here's what I mean by that. There's a facet or a tenet of best small format, and with all keys, in fact, you're going to always have the dimension from the reference point on the key blank to the first cut. As you may know with small format, it's from the tip of the key, or the shoulder at the tip of the key, to the first cut. Then every cut after that is the center to center. So you're spacing. You'll have your first cut dimension, then all successive cuts will be on the same spacing increment. Best uses a 0.150 inch center to center, which means the centers of your capping pins, these guys, are literally 150 thousandths center to center each. So when I say that you can not use this in all instances, there are small format platforms that take 140 thousandths centers. This won't work. You need a different capping press. Off the top of my head, Hager's small format system uses 140 thousandths. You would have to have a Hager capping block. Kaba has a wide range of peaks, protected, restricted keyways. They have a small format platform. You may or may not be able to use it. They have some of their system is the right center to center, some of it's not. So in every environment that you're dealing with, understand this is 150 thousandths center to center. Each of those 7 capping pins that come out, the exact center is 0.15 inch or 0.150 inch. So will this work in all small format? It won't. Will it work in everything that's a clone or a copy of the Best original system, patented by Frank Best in the early 1920s? And that original patent is not the small format core that we have today, but he's on the porch knocking on the door to come to the final design for small format interchangeable core. It wasn't called small format by Best ever. It was always known as Best type or Best style. While other manufacturers didn't like to use the name of their competition when they're referring to a type of core or cylinder platform. So Schlage actually, someone at Schlage came up with the term small format. That caught on, from what I understand, immediately with the entire community. It was no longer known as Best. It was known as small format. The marketing angle was, oh, that's small, that's tiny, that's not what you want. Schlage calls theirs full size, FSIC for full size. They figure from a marketing perspective, what would you rather have, the small or the full size? Every other manufacturer who makes removable cores would call it large format when it's not a Best or all of the clones of Best. Be mindful, Best invented the entire product category. Everyone after that took that design, there's no question. Even though Falcon successfully defended the lawsuit brought by Best, again in the 1960s, because their patent was novel to the point where it was apparently not an infringement, even though everything else is the same. The spacing, the shoulder cuts, the science behind how you combinate that cylinder is the same. I personally prefer the spring cover because it's just less work, and then while I need to have a capping block, it's a small tool that I can hold in my hand and get my spring cover there, and then tap that down with the top of the capping block attachment or piece that comes with it. But if I did any sort of volume individually capping, I would have line 1 of my PO to the manufacturer would be this capping press. So now let's switch to the screen view and let's take a look at all of the supporting documentation that would go with our deep dive into the Best CD517 capping and decapping, it decaps as well, press. And the decapping portion is just as important as the capping, because you've got some cylinders and you are going to recombinate them. Put them in upside down first, get rid of the segments and the pins and the caps, put that aside, do all of those, now start to combinate, then cap them all. So let's switch to the screen view and take a closer look at the supporting documentation. Okay, let's take a little bit of tour into the world of the CD517 heavy-duty core capping, decapping press. Let's take a look at that. Well, this is the item here that we're looking at, and one smooth operation. This press seals all barrels in either a 6 or 7 pin combinated core. That should be correctly stated as 5, 6, or 7, and I'll correct that. And by the time you're seeing this video, that will be updated. And while it's unusual to see a 5-pin best core, I've never seen one myself. They do exist. You can order them. 6-pin is common. 7-pin is incredibly common. The cap seating depth is adjustable, and that's one hallmark of this. And as you review your manuals of how to combinate these cores, there's an actual depth that is given. I am challenged to recall a particular reference document where it says, but locksmithing manuals and books on small format are most certainly going to have that data available, and we may be able to find it when we look a little bit further. The very rugged tool bolts to the bench and lasts indefinitely. That's true. The only time they don't last, I know, because customers have called to ask if they can buy only the capping pins. The bottom line is you don't want to bend those. I had a client looking for an A1 capping press, and they discontinued operations at some point in 2019 and needed only the new capping pin assembly and couldn't get them, and was faced with purchasing an entire new tool as a result. I don't know if they bought a new tool, but don't bend the pins is the moral of the story. Quick reference to combinating best cores. Let's see what that is. I put that there at some point. Okay, so this is literally the document that is underneath the lid of a typical best original pinning kit. This basically teaches you how to pin best cores, how to combinate them. And this is for an A2 system only here, because this probably came out of this is from an A2 system, although they list an A4 system here as well. They do call them segments, A and B segments, and A3 and A4 are different. Well, here's A4, E and F, so let's just imagine that A3 is C and D segments. That we know. And here you go, we found it. Lucky for us. Drive cap to a depth of 0.025 to 0.040 inch. So you'd be able to test that with your caliper. Well, no, you really couldn't test it with your caliper. I am challenged to... Well, you would be able to adjust that, and we're going to talk about how to service the tool in a little bit, but I can think of how you could easily adjust that. You'll want to, of course, just adjust that tool by perhaps pressing your capping pins down onto a solid surface and then making an adjustment on your set screw that's on the arbor of the capping press. Anyway, we'll get to that. Drive cap to a depth of 0.25 or 0.40, so that's neat. And the capping instructions are there. Other information, this is here just because it's helpful and useful. And here is indeed our capping block that's been literally just modified to fit into our capping press. Very helpful document that's there. Now, speaking of helpful documents, product brochure. This is an overview of all of the service equipment for combinating best cores. The combinator itself, the AD433, not unusual for us to sell. They make those in different variants because the combinators will work on particular arrangements of keys. The type of key, whether it's standard, premium, peaks, and what keyway will determine whether or not it's a left-hand or right-hand combinator, and what type of die set is in the tool as well. So before you buy an AD433, you have to know what key you're cutting, and they're specific to the key. And don't quote me, but there are 3 or 4 derivative models, something in that range. And obviously, because it's a combinator, you have to know if you're doing an A2, A3, or A4 system. And we'll talk about that. So we can see that there's standard, premium, and then 6 and 7 pin peaks. That's a typo. So there are 4 different platforms, but then of course you do have your A3 and A4 that they'll do. A3 is mostly a discontinued system, although they'll certainly continue to service that A3 installed system. Key carriages are available separately for the Combinator. They do wear out. You cut enough keys, they will wear out. Digital calibration guide, just sold one of those earlier this week. A very, very accurate way to know exactly what that root depth is on the cut of the key. Obviously our CD517, and then smaller parts, your capping block. The CD547 is the hand capping pin, and on your tool you'd have 7 of these. Tweezers and ejector pin is here as well. Stamping blocks, stamping plates, graphite storage tools, engraving plates or stamping plates, and stamping kits themselves. Lubricant. You always want to use the lubricant that the factory recommends. You do not want to use anything other than what the factory recommends. There can be intensely small springs in a system that if you were to use some sort of lubricant that will collect dust, dirt, debris, it will prevent the cylinder from working sooner or later. Only the factory original. This all here, these are tools on helping you combinate the cylinders. This tool here allows you to quickly determine what segments you'll drop into the core itself. I've never used that. I just find calculating it in my head easy enough to where relying on a tool to do the math for me is just unnecessary, but to each his own. And all of that is detailed in the quick reference guide, which is here, how you combinate that. Okay. Basically, you have your cuts of your change key and a master key. You take your control key and you add 10 to it, and then you subtract from that number your pin stack of all of your A segments and any master segments. Then that is going to be... So if your control is 18, I said that, and I said it too quickly. If your control key is 18, add 10 to that. So now we have 18. Subtract to that your pin stack, which would be 9. So your resultant is a number 9 pin that you would drop. 9 plus 9 is 18, minus 23 is 6. So that's how that goes. They're not showing you the segments that you would drop. Okay, so let's take a look here now. I based on that being the control cut, but they're saying it's a control segment of 8. And if that control segment is 8, that would mean our control key cut has to be 7. 7 plus 10 is 17, minus 9 would leave us 8. So our control key here has to be a 7. And I don't see where they're telling us the control, but it could be no other number for that value. Anyway, they indirectly teach you how to do this here. And we'll get to the manual that I will point you to that will be a deep dive on how to pin all of this material. Tweezers and whatnot, and other service equipment related material that is not germane. I can tell you that this catalog on the boring kit is quite out of date. Best does not sell this kit anymore. If you order this kit, it will be a Pro-Lock kit. So if you want if you want a boring jig kit, just order the Pro-Lock, which we can supply to you. Slide capping block, that will allow you to hold the tool in place so that you can cap that down. This is a die for rethreading mortise cylinders. This mortise cylinder wrench, the ED211, is handy because it will not only allow you to insert the tool into the face of the mortise cylinder shell, but to give you a better handle to thread that into the mortise lock, but you can turn the tool around now and then operate the lock itself to make sure that your cylinder shell is installed correctly, meaning the tailpiece is oriented correctly. Mortise cylinder cam assembly tool. Yeah, sure, if you need to orient that to get your core in. That can be a hassle to get the cylinders in the door. You want, if you don't want to use a giant screwdriver, which I do not recommend, the ED212 is what's going to allow you to get the 2 drive members in the right place. Obviously some padlock tools here that I'm not familiar with. Now, moving forward, we're going to get to the unpacking instructions. Basically, I'm not going to read this, but it says be careful, be mindful, do it carefully. But what they do say is save everything, because they say store carton and foam for future use. You never know. You might need to ship that back to Best to have it repaired. It might fall off the counter, the desk, the workbench, and need repair. So save all of that material. You definitely want to do that. I would also date the material and keep all your documentation in it. Now, to the business end of what we're dealing with, the installation instructions for the unit, a 2-page document that comes with it. And let's move into that portion of this as well. Okay, so let's dive into the operating instructions. And we're just going to go through these, quite frankly, step by step, because there's not really much to it. We'll go through it together, and then maybe we'll switch to the screen view and take a closer look when we need to. Thank you for purchasing the best capping decapping press. We're sure you'll be pleased with its features. Yeah, I mean, capping and decapping. It offers, along with the quality you've come to know from Best and expect from them as well. When you unpack the press, you should find the following items. The business end, the capping decapping press, the segment cup, which is that small little plastic cup, and then the decapping tool assembly, which is made of the following 3 items. So the decapping tool assembly is this. There are 3 elements here. There are the 7 pins, there are the 7 set screws, and then there is the block. That is indeed in the box. Okay. Block, pins, set screws. Okay, now let's move forward. Capping instructions, and I'll switch to the screen, to the camera view when I think it's necessary. Place the decapping press on a flat, stable surface. Bolt it down, tighten securely. Step 3. That's going to be step 3. That's going to be rotate the handle up until it rests on the handle stop pin and the pin block, and the pins are at their highest point. We've demonstrated that. We've rotated that, cycled it up and down. Okay, that's figure 1. Now, you've got it opened is what it is basically at this point. Now what you're going to do is you're going to install the stop pin down into the capping block according to the length of the cylinder that you're working on. Unusual for you to put it in the first hole. 6 or 7 pin is where you'll insert that. And then that step is done. Insert the stop pin, capping block shown separately from the press. So you'll insert that. Insert a combinated core with the chamber holes pointed towards the top, and you'll push that in, and it will stop against the stop pin so that you have the core properly aligned with the location of your holes. So place the combinated core without the springs and without your caps. So at this point, you have dropped in your segments, your A and B, or your C and D, or your E and F segments, depending on if it's A2, A3, or A4. Push the core into the capping block until the rear of the core touches the pin. Great. Now at this point, drop all your springs and drop all of your caps. Starting at the front hole of the capping block, insert the springs into each hole. Put as many springs as there are pins. For example, for a 6-pin core, make sure that you're putting in 6 springs in the first 6 holes. Now this is a tray that's here, and they'll mention it in a moment, but that's where you're going to pour your caps. And then at that point, you're just going to use your finger and gently slide them out. Make sure all the springs are seated inside of the capping block. No spring should protrude above the top of the capping block. Make sure that all springs look even. If something doesn't look even when you're looking at the top of the capping block in terms of the springs, that's most definitely a telltale sign that your pin stack is the wrong height, or you've got the wrong spring, or it's a damaged spring. So be mindful of that. Empty a bag of core caps into the thin metal tray that rests on the capping block. Slide a cap onto each open hole that holds a spring. See figure 4 here. Caution, make sure to not place more than one cap into a single hole. That's going to change that depth that they had talked about. Placing more than one cap causes excess spring tension and could cause difficulty in turning a key in the completed core. That's true. If you're trying to push a key in and out and then turn it, it would really be more wear and tear on the key and the pin as you're moving the key in and out of the broaching of the cylinder plug itself. Having additional tension when it's rotating, yeah, sure, because your spring is under more compression than necessary, or more than it's been designed for. Cap core, remove your fingers from the core cap area because it's a half-ton press. If you wanted to damage your finger with this, the tool will oblige. So just make sure you stand clear of the business end. A half-ton press is a small arbor press, but it's plenty against the pinky. Do not place more. Okay, remove your fingers from the core block area and pull the handle firmly downward until it bottoms out, seating all of the caps into the core. Place the handle back into its original position and remove the completed capped core. Okay, now that does it for capping this material. At this stage, they move to how to decap. So you're doing a repinning job, and you're recombinating cylinders. So let's talk about that. Unless you've already done so, follow the steps to prepare to use the capping press on, they say slide 1, I'd say step 1. Remove the stop pin from the capping block. Put the segment cup under the capping block and inside the open hole at the front of the press so it will catch the old segments. So what they're saying is open up the little plastic container, push it inside of this area underneath your capping block. Obviously anything will work for that, but they do provide a tool for catching that material, the segment cup. Using a key and the CD548 ejector pin tool or similar tool, make sure that the holes in the bottom of the core are aligned. So what they're saying is, if this is a combinated core, they're going to be aligned because you've got pins in there. But what you have to make sure of is that the small ejector hole is lined up with the chambers in the cylinder. And if they're not, you have to make sure, because when you push through your decapping tool, you don't want to bend these. Put the capped combinated core into the capping block in the upside down position. Small holes are here, the large holes need to be at the bottom. Push the core into the capping block until it stops. For 5-pin cores, remove 2 ejector pins by loosening 2 set screws at one end of the tool in figure 6. 5 or 6 pin, okay? You don't want to press down and have nowhere for that pin to go. Put the decapping tool ejector pins into the holes of the capping block, starting with the first hole. Move the tool back and forth, pressing firmly downward until you feel the ejector pins going through the small holes of the core and rest on the pin segments. You will feel a slight spring tension as you're continuing to push through. So be mindful. If you're getting substantial resistance, stop. Something's not aligned. Remove your fingers from the core block area and pull the handle firmly downward until it bottoms out, injecting all core pin segments through the capping block and into the segment cup. Be careful not to force the handle down too hard. If you feel resistance, if you do feel resistance, adjust the decapping tool until the ejector pins are seated properly. Place the handle back into its original position on the stop pin and remove the completed decapped core. They probably should have put all this first, but nonetheless. So that's the installation instructions. Now, there's another important document that I would like to bring to your attention. On the page of the item we're working on, there's a link here to the manufacturer's page. You click on that, And that's going to allow us to review all of the best products that we sell. Okay. I'll link to the manufacturer's website, as well as a link to the full product catalog. Now, here's the document I'm trying to show you. Well, there's two of them, actually. Maybe three. The Best Access Service Manual. Let's go with that first. This is an epic document. One nice thing about Best is that they publish all of this material, and you'll see it's over 1,300 pages of information. I've called Best before and asked for technical support, and the rep I spoke with, did say that's certainly in the published service manual. And at that point, I realized, oh my gosh, I've just wasted everyone's time, because I, of course, have the service manual, because I was asking for a part number of something. I don't recall what it was, but apart from a lock, and they said, yeah, that's in the service manual, and Best does a great job at that. So we're going to do a find function on our keyboard for CD517, and because that's 1,300 plus pages, it's going to take a second for it to find it. And here we go. Let's take a look. Now let's continue on looking at this service manual, the CD517 core capping press. It only shows up in my find function on the keyboard one time. Following tools are used for servicing cores and keys. Let's see if there's anything that I can find under capping, which there sure will be. Core capping press. Yeah, they don't list anything particular about this other than just indicating this is used in servicing the cores. So not a lot of information here about that. There's no, unfortunately, what I was really looking for was a guideline by which to detail how you would service the tool from the perspective of adjusting the depth of how far down you are pushing your caps into the tool, which was referred to here. Unfortunately, that's not the case. You'll be able to tailor that. If you find that your caps are too deep, you can loosen that bolt and then adjust it by whatever. You can insert some thickness of material and then adjust the unit accordingly. I've read manuals that have said that dimension is not hypercritical, but it does need to be within the engineered range. So not to lose too much sleep over it. It's basically a 32nd of an inch. So a little bit of latitude there in that regard. So in terms of the service manual, not much about that. But speaking of service manuals, we can look at the A2 system service manual. And if you've bought this press, you know how to combinate their cores. But I'd like to show you where the document is. This is the A2 service manual. And what this is going to serve as obviously an overview of not only the tools, but keying in general, specifically as it applies to the A2 system, which basically means you have a pin stack that has to equal 23. Now, it doesn't have to equal 23. There are people out there that will knowingly pin it to a 24 or maybe a 22, and I think they do that to, they may do that either because they don't know the proper way to do it or to throw off someone who's trying to decode the system. You can determine information based on simple formulas with Best as long as 23 is adhered to. It's no longer good by adding 10 to the control key and setting those stacks if you're trying to reverse decode something, or subtract 13 to get a driver pin if you've not adhered to 23. But this manual is a little bit of a deeper dive when it comes to the A2 system. Basic steps for combinating cores. Okay, so very helpful information that's here. There's another document, Best Core and Key Service Manual. Now this is going to talk a lot more about the particular items. Okay, give you a little bit of an introduction as to how a 2 shear line cylinder would work. And just interestingly enough, well, I'll talk about the 2 shear line concept in a moment. There's that quick reference to combinating best cores, which is underneath the manual I talked about earlier. Steps on decoding a SFIC system published in the Keynotes magazine, April of 2008. That's very handy. And then to go even further with that would be the best A2 and A4 keys system training. In this document, while it's pretty long-winded because it's very detailed, it will give you the essence of exactly how to combinate best cores. Okay? And it does go through painstaking step-by-step processes of how to go about doing it. But if you want to learn how to do it, this document will teach you how to do it. There's no question about that. For A2 and A4, the A3 system is not talked about in here, but you can certainly find resources, books from locksmith authors that can talk about A3 at length. The only reason you'd bump into it is if it's installed in your facility and you've been working with it already for years, if not decades. It was a discontinued system because it was found that it was an unreliable system, permitting key interchange and core failure because the increment of 0.018 was found, I think it's 018, actually I know what it was, 018, was found to be too small for the segments, the master pins, and the cylinders did not work reliably. So another handy document. Finally, the last link would be that best patent that's up here. That's what the 1921 patent looks like for this 2 shear line removable core, removable cylinder concept. Now what's interesting is two things. Ball bearings, that permitted that reduced the amount of wear and tear on the key blank itself because the pins may have been made of nickel silver or what they call German silver.
This message comes from NPR sponsor Xfinity. Fast, reliable.
Okay, so my phone just started for no reason. But the key blanks were not made of a harder material to contend with the harder pins. So they added ball bearings, which substantially reduced the amount of wear and tear on the key blank. Now, that's not an original best idea, even though putting that together with a 2 shear line concept, permitting it to be removable. So we have 3 things: removable, ball bearings, and 2 shear lines. Now, 2 of these 3 concepts can be traced back to, and we're going to go to the manufacturer's page in our catalog, and then we're going to type in Corbin, and we're going to get to the Corbin-Russwin page. That can all be traced back to a patent from 1898 or so, master ring patent. His name was Edward O'Keefe. He didn't call it master ring, though. Let's take a look. And I did have to dig a moment to find where that patent was. There's an article that I wrote about master ring. Master ring is a 2 shear line technology that was patented in about 1898 by a man with the name Edward O'Keefe. And as we open up that article, and I'm just going to type in Edward because I'm sure I'll find it. For some reason I'm not. I know that it's under history. Here we are. The master ring was patented by Edward. Okay, I'm not sure why we didn't find that. Here is that patent. Now, there are no ball bearings in this 2 shear line patent from 1898, but there are no ball bearings, but there are 2 shear lines. So we know that P.F. Corbin marketed and advertised the use of ball bearings. Corbin also touts the inclusion of balls made of German silver, and you can find catalog references to where they were using ball bearings because the keys would wear out. So it has been said by experts in the field, and I certainly see the connection as well, that the Best patent sure did in 1921. You know, Frank Best would have been an absolute student of the technology happening at the time, so he would have been aware of the ball bearings. He would have been aware of 2 shear line cylinders, because it wasn't just Corbin's master ring that Edward O'Keefe patented in 1898, but it was the Yale duplex cylinder. While it was 2 separate cylinders, it gave you the same logic when it came to separating shear lines. So the 2 different shear lines is what permits the core to be removable. Obviously, as material science improved, they went away with the ball bearings, even though that can still be done today, by Corbin at least. But this isn't a Corbin video. So let's wrap up this video on camera. Now, in conclusion, I hope that we've talked about the capping press, how to use it at length. If you're buying one of these, you already know how to use it, I'm quite sure. If you don't, reach out, let us know, and we'll help to work with you on resolving any other questions that you might have. But the purpose of the video was to demonstrate the tool visually. You know what, some basic dimensional properties. So the overall height to the top of the unit is about 12 inch. To the top of the arbor is about 16.5. You're about 8-10 inches deep and about 6 inches wide. So now you've got some dimensions, know where it will fit on your bench. Also, the purpose of the video was to draw your attention to the supporting documentation as much as I could think of. And while we don't spend a lot of time combinating small format here, we do it, and can speak from a first-hand perspective in terms of how to do it and what tools and tricks and tips work. So don't hesitate to reach out to us with any technical support requests for any small format product, especially those by Best. One thing in closing I'll say, every time that I reach out to the Best company for technical support, they are absolutely superb in all instances, every single time that I call them. And to them I say thank you very much. It's a, one saying that was said to me almost 30 years ago: we don't sell anything high-tech in the door hardware industry, but much of what we sell is highly technical. And that is certainly true then as it is today. Any questions, please feel free to reach out to us. Rich Howard, owner of Architectural Builder Supply. And thank you.